I come from a poor community. My family didn't have much. Um, I was working in the pineapple fields as a kid. So like, if you're a native person who's worried about their land getting stripped away by a billionaire, a modern day colonizer, you're not thinking about battery storage. If you're a black mom who's scared that her teenage son is going to get shot by a police by stepping outside, you're not worried about retrofitting light bulbs, right? If you're going to get deported, that's the first thing on your mind. But the thing is, we need all those people in the movement in order to win, in order to actually stop the climate crisis from destroying society as we know it and our economy.
Hey, theGrio fam, is Gerren Gaynor, White House correspondent and managing editor of politics at theGrio. And I'm here with Kaniela Ing, who is the national director of the Green New Deal Network. Kaniela, welcome to theGrio. Pleasure to have you.
Great to be here.
So the Green New Deal used to be, in my opinion, when we saw the reaction to the Green New Deal, was a fringe policy issue. Today, some of the components of the Green New Deal are now center stage. We saw President Biden sign the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the most historic number of investments in climate and environmental issues. First, what do you make of the Green New Deal becoming more fringe and becoming more mainstream, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, the idea behind the Green New Deal was always very mainstream. It was, rather than thinking about what we need to sacrifice with the climate movement, which is a false narrative, it's what we will gain. Like the things, like what can we change and improve in society by this clean energy transition that we know is necessary, but using it as an opportunity to actually heal historical harms, levied against Black people, like indigenous people, there's people of color, generally women. Like this was an opportunity to really transform society to work for everyone. And, I'm an organizer, and anyone who organized knows it's a lot easier to get people to come out and stop something than it is to get them to build something new. So this Green New Deal was like, it had that je ne sais quoi of like something affirmative and positive that will get people excited. So that's when you saw like millions of young people coming to the streets, organizations like the Sunrise Movement, organizing people that people thought were unorganizable, like 18-year-olds coming out in droves, giant marches across every continent, literally more people on the streets than ever before. So that's really what a Green New Deal is. It's just the positive side of the climate movement, that we can have rail and mass transit that's free or affordable for everyone. We don't have to rely on isolation, and in our suburban communities, we can actually have a community again where our kids are free to play in safe playgrounds, and we have shared community gardens, bike paths, walkable neighborhoods, and all the things that really define a beautiful city or place.
And as I mentioned, the Inflation Reduction Act, $300 billion into climate-related policy, building clean energy, jobs, and infrastructure. But I understand that advocates, while advocates such as yourself welcome these investments, you say it's not enough. Can you walk us through why more needs to be done?
Yeah, so the Inflation Reduction Act, if you ask someone from Europe or anywhere else, they're going to be like, wow, that's like the most transformative climate bill we've seen in a long time. But when you really get into the details, it does exclude many of the transformative climate care and jobs and justice investments that people like me have been pushing for decades now. And, we got to tackle these crises not in silos, but intersectionally, because they all overlap. And a lot of the provisions that we had that would ensure justice for like communities of color, poor folks, were cut out. And right now, I think our work is making sure that when it's being implemented, a lot of the good stuff gets maximized, and some of the bad provisions that will actually increase inequality gets defeated, and that we come back for more, because we need much more investments. I think if you actually look at how far the IRA will go in terms of decarbonizing our planet or getting rid of fossil fuel pollution, it doesn't even get us halfway there. If you look at what the US should be morally accountable for, given our decades of pollution, it represents about 3% of the investments we need. We need about $1 trillion a year. So we need to show that that the Inflation Reduction Act actually works for our people, so that Biden is incentivized to invest even more in his second term. So, that's like some of the wins were job creation and offshore wind, billions for environmental justice communities, new opportunities for funding green projects. But we know that there's still like millions of lead pipes that are killing people that didn't make it in the budget. There's a lot of projects like mass transit projects that didn't get funded that's needed. Electrifying school buses is one thing that is in it, but it's going to require a lot of work to actually get up to scale. So, it's the first step, maybe a down payment to the Green New Deal we need, but it doesn't take us all the way there.
A down payment. That's a good way of looking at it. How much money should the United States be spending on climate and environmental related issues?
Well, we should be spending roughly $1 trillion a year. That's what the Thrive agenda laid out. 15 national groups got together. We worked directly with members of our community to shape a bill that got mass support across the left, right, and center, or not the right, but the left and center of American politics. And through negotiations, especially with Joe Manchin really acting on the behest of the fossil fuel industry, it got chopped down to the Inflation Reduction Act. And I think it's up to us to show President Biden that we're still here, and we're not. You can't take for granted the base that got you elected to come out again. They might not have voted for your opponent, but they might not come out if they're not getting what they're promised during the first election. So $1 trillion a year is a top line number, and we just need to show that this is going to work. So there's an incentive to bring more.
I saw a poll recently. It said that only 8% of Americans considered global warming as an important issue. Obviously, the economy is always at the top of the list. Crime. That's a pretty low number, and surprising because we are seeing so much evidence of global warming today, now more than ever. How do we get more Americans to understand the severity of the climate crisis, even though they seem to know it's happening around them?
I mean, look, I wasn't brought into politics or the movement through climate. Like, I wasn't one of the people that were moved by the polar bear ads. I mean, it's cool. I'm glad people care about polar bears, but I come from a poor community. My family didn't have much. I was working in the pineapple fields as a kid. So like, if you're a native person who's worried about their land getting stripped away by a billionaire, a modern day colonizer, you're not thinking about battery storage. If you're a Black mom who's scared that her teenage son is going to get shot by police by stepping outside, you're not worried about retrofitting light bulbs, right? If you're going to get deported, that's the first thing on your mind. So, but the thing is, we need all those people in the movement in order to win, in order to actually stop the climate crisis from destroying society as we know it and our economy. So in order to actually get those people in the movement, you got to be speaking to their issues and dealing with that at the same time as climate change. And I think for decades now, for generations, the environmental movement has been too siloed, and it's been led by a lot of white folks who aren't experiencing these traumatic events in the same way that our communities might. So that's kind of our charge with the Green New Deal Network, is to look at it holistically and communicate it and make it more about people than paper straws or whatever solutions that have been presented in the past. If you invest trillions of dollars now, you'll save way, way, way more in the future by averting climate calamity.
And part of the resistance, part of the problem in not advancing on climate is resistance from Republicans in Congress who continue to challenge or question climate science data and promote fossil fuels. What do you make of that in Washington?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clear that Republicans and Democrats alike understand that the climate change is a problem. The ones who are denying it's a problem are lying. They already know. They're getting paid by the fossil fuel industry, sometimes directly, but usually through their campaign funds, to say these things. So, take it for a grain of salt. I don't believe they're coming from a real place, but there are real concerns around jobs. So I think a lot of our work now has to be about making sure that there's a just transition. If you come from a family that's been working at a coal or oil plant, we got to make sure that if we're saying that coal or oil plant should shut down, that there's ample opportunities, better opportunities, even guaranteed opportunities for anybody impacted, not just the workers of that plant, but by the community, the surrounding community, which could see gentrification if we don't plan it out very carefully. So, those are the real concerns around the clean energy transition. But the idea that it's not happening is wild. You just look outside these days, and it looks like, in New York, it looked like Blade Runner just a month ago or a few weeks ago. So it's there's no denying it at this point. It's just lying.
And do you think that the current makeup of Congress, there's enough bipartisan support to pass more legislation to spend more money on climate before next year's election?
I mean, if there's one thing that is positive about Joe Biden, is that he's a master at bipartisanship, and he wrung out that towel as tightly as you possibly can, got everything out of the bipartisan possibilities of the day. But to truly meet the promise of his quote unquote Bidenomics, to build a modern, sustainable economy that prioritizes working families, that he's campaigned on in 2020 and he's campaigning again in 2024, then he needs to think bigger. The president needs to go beyond the bipartisan compromises that his record is based on so far. And, he talks a lot about likening himself to FDR or Roosevelt, moved forward without bipartisanship in the beginning. He found a New Deal coalition of community groups, of labor groups, of Southern Democrats, which he shouldn't do, because that's why there's a lot of racist provisions in the original New Deal. But groups like ours, the Green Deal Network, and if he can build that coalition, then he can move forward without that bipartisanship, because bipartisanship for bipartisanship's sake, when our economy could collapse in 20 years because of climate change, isn't the legacy that I imagine President Biden wants to have.
And lastly, what does that advocacy work look like for the Green New Deal Network, especially as we head into the election cycle?
Yeah, so the Green Deal Network, 15 national groups, just doing a lot of work, the inside and outside, organizing new people, knocking on thousands, hopefully millions of doors in the next few years, doing events, talking about what the Inflation Reduction Act could mean for our communities. We're doing a Green New Deal tour this fall, right after the Invest in America tour, to highlight the good and also stop the bad. It looks like meeting with members of Congress, doing direct actions to hold them accountable. We could walk you 1,000 roses, or we can name and shame you. Depends on how responsive you are to the communities. So, I think that's really where Bidenomics came from. It was a response to the movements and all the pressure that was coming from the ground, the thousands of calls, thousands of texts, thousands of doors, and we're not going to stop. So, I'm really optimistic that President Biden is going to heed the call, but it's really up to us as the movement to make sure he does.
Kaniela Ing, National Director of the Green New Deal Network, thank you again for your time.
Thank you for having me.